everyone, and welcome to our first 30 Under 30 live chat of the season. My name is Laura von Stockhausen. I am the marketing coordinator here at the NSCAA and your moderator for today's discussion. Today's panel, our 30 Under 30 participants will be discussing the landscape of player development, specifically in terms of the elite athletes. But before we get started on that, let's meet our 30 Under 30 participants. We will start with you, James. James, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm James Garcia Pratt. I'm currently the assistant men's soccer coach at Luther College, a Division III school in Decorah, Iowa. I played here. I graduated in 2014, and I'm also currently the head varsity boys coach at the Decorah High School. And so, yeah, I'm just excited to be a part of the program and looking forward to the discussion today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll throw it now to you, Randy, a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name is Randy Simmons. I'm the assistant women's soccer coach at Chico State. We're in Northern California. We're a Division II program, and I've been here 2 years. Very fortunate to be here, and feel even more fortunate to be a part of this program. So, ready to get going.
Cool. All right, well then we're going to go ahead and jump to our first question. And just a reminder to our viewers, if you have any questions for our panels, feel free to tweet us at NSCAA using the hashtag NSCAA Live. So our first question, we're going to throw it to you, James. It's pretty simple. When you're coaching your teams and evaluating your roster, how do you identify the elite athletes?
I think on just like a basic level, you look at the physical attributes. You know, can they handle the game? Technically is a big one. You know, can they, again, they all play a part, but can they handle the speed of the game? You know, and then a lot of, you know, tactical decisions. Do they make good soccer decisions when they play? And then a lot of, you know, more psychological. How's their attitude? How's their focus? How's their, you know, some of their self-motivation? And kind of how does that play a part? You know, when you're coaching a team, you might not be able to, you know, identify right away when you're maybe recruiting or some of that stuff, but when you're coaching a team, you're able to, you know, when you're with them every day, you can kind of identify some of those, you know, not those obvious ones, their technical, physical, being able to see some of that mental side of the game and their tactical side.
Great. And how about you, Randy? What are you looking for when you're identifying those elite athletes?
Well, James touched on a couple of those things you really look at, but, you know, as a college coach, and I'm sure James is the same way, we have to ask ourselves this question every weekend, right? When we go out recruiting and we're trying to identify kids in maybe 15 or 20 minutes if they can come in and help our program and if they're that elite status, right? So it comes down to a couple of things. You know, it's pretty simple. The decision-making and the execution always have to be there. The decision-making, are they making the right tactical choices in the right situations depending on the game? And the execution piece, do they have the athleticism and technical ability to get it done and make those decisions happen? But I think the better question that I like to ask myself, and a bit of an X factor, is, you know, do they impact the game? Do they have an effect on the game? Because if they're really elite, then the game's going to change and play around them. So when they're on the pitch, is it different for their team than when they're subbed out? Does it become a different game? And those are really the three kind of key areas I like to look at. But at the same time, I think it's really about your perspective as a coach and what level you're coming from to identify elite athletes for your program or your level, wherever you may be. So.
Absolutely. I think you guys would agree that there's, you know, elite is different from every age group to every club to
exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So
Right. And an elite athlete for my high school team is different than an elite athlete for my Division III team to the elite athlete for someone playing in MLS to the Premier League. You know, so it depends. It's got to fit your program, but then also your style of coaching too. You know, some teams want to, you know, one more of an athlete and can play a little more direct style, but other players are more possession oriented and want a player who's more technical in nature and doesn't really care what his size is as long as he can play. And so it kind of just fits, you know, everyone's definition is different.
Sure, definitely.
Definitely. And if I can jump back in, Laura, it's a little bit like when I go watch ECNL games versus a regular league in my backyard. in Chico, it's a little bit of a different level. And even though they're the same age groups, a player that you might think, oh my gosh, they look so good in this setting, you throw them in with, the best of the best, right? And then you have, a bit of a drop off. So it's all about your perspective really and what you see every day as a coach, because sometimes you think, oh wow, this player's so good, and then you get them in a different setting and maybe not so much.
Sure, definitely. Well, this next question is coming to you, Randy, and you guys have touched on it a little bit already, but what are those maybe X factors that you see in the elite athlete that differentiates themselves from the average player? What are those mental capabilities and those physical ones? And again, James, you touched on it a bit already, but is there anything maybe for a coach out there that potentially wants to get their elite athlete to the next level, or parents, and what are some of those things that you can instill to make them elite?
Yeah. So there's a whole list of attributes, right, that we could pull from, and this gets talked about a lot, but for me it really comes down to character. I'm a huge advocate for character and those pieces of it, and I think, from my experiences and being around the best coaches that I've been around, they talk about the same thing, that character piece. The physical attributes, that's the easy part, right? And that comes easy because at a certain point, either you have that or you don't. And, you don't have to be the best coach in the world to sit down at a field and see those things. Those are the things that jump out at you right away. The bigger kids, the strong, the explosive, fast, those things, they're there or they're not, and it's so easy to see them. But it's that other part that's harder to see and kind of get to. The person's character is really at the heart of their success or, lack thereof, unfortunately. So I really look at, their drive. Do they have discipline, some resiliency, and definitely grit? The intangible things you really can't teach. I think that you can hone in on them and sharpen them and make them better, but they have to have that as a base when they already get to us, because it's so hard to instill that from nothing, right? So those things are definitely important, and then I think the confidence piece is even more important, because consistency is the hardest thing. And these players that we put so much pressure on them because they're the best and they're elite and they're this and they're that, they're still going to have bad games. And they have to bounce back out of that, even with all the pressure from their team and coaches around them. So the confidence and a certain undeniable spirit that they have to have, because all these players, they start from the same. They start down here, and then they go through this growth period, and maybe they get to be an average player, and they're there for 3 or 4 years at that level, and all of a sudden it clicks. And then they can make that jump to that elite status, but they have to have those character pieces to be able to unlock that next level. Because the physical attributes alone are never enough. So those are a few of the things that I think help players go from average to making that jump to that elite, if you will.
Sure, great. How about you, James? Do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Randy covered a lot there, and I agree with the character aspect. You have to have a player whose work ethic is good, and just an all-around good person who's going to help the team too. It kind of sets them apart when they have a focus. I think focus is a big one. We talk with our players a lot. Is there's 90 minutes in a game, but if you lose focus, you can play well for 89 minutes. You lose focus for that 1 minute, and you lose 1-0. So it's having that focus, I think, too, which sometimes is hard to identify like right away when you're at, and like Randy said, some of those physical things you can identify in 2 seconds. You can see who's going to be the best athlete out there, but it's finding those other things. And I think just having a strong mentality to be able to handle some of the adversity. Every player is going to go through it, whether your first year you don't play as much as you have been. You've been the player that's been picked by your coach for your whole life, for however long you've been playing, and all of a sudden for the first time ever you don't get picked. And so how do you handle that? And those, I think that sets you apart from just being a average player to someone who can go and do good big things.
Sure, perfect. All right, this next question, I'm gonna head it over to you, James. Before we get to that question, though, I'd like to remind our viewers that if you have any questions for Randy or James, shoot us a tweet using the hashtag NSCAA Live, and we'll try to get that included. But James, this next question is, not everybody is lucky enough to have a team full of elite players. And you guys both being in the college game, you maybe have been able to kind of take the cream of the crop or hopefully build a team of elite players. But how do you incorporate training that elite athlete in a team dynamic when you maybe, don't have a full roster at the same level?
Right. It can be hard when you're in that kind of dynamic with, some players who are maybe way better than some of the other players, but I think you got to challenge them to show how important they are to the team, but also, we tell some of our guys, you got to make your teammates better around you. So if you're this elite athlete who doesn't make anyone that much better around you, I wouldn't even, I don't think I would even consider that an elite athlete.
Sure.
Someone who's elite, I think that's part of being an elite athlete. One of the attributes is making players around you better.
Yeah, great point.
And being able to handle the team dynamic. Sometimes you go to a college and maybe don't agree with every aspect of the tactics or something, but can you be a player that can get over themselves a little bit and put the team's tactics, the team dynamics in front. And if I think that's a huge part of being an elite athlete is you got to handle the team dynamic, because if you can't, then I don't think you're an elite athlete. Then I think it's one of the attributes that maybe we didn't talk about exactly in some of the other questions, but I think being that team player, being that person who can kind of make the teammates better around you is hugely important. And it can be frustrating, I think, for some of those athletes if you're playing with some players who maybe you think are not better, but I think it's your role as one of the best players to improve the players around you.
Right, and just kind of to elaborate on that, James, is that something that you as a coach, you need to sit down with those elite athletes and make sure that they know that, or is it something you're hoping that they're going to kind of want to do and naturally step up and do?
I think some players just naturally kind of have that leadership ability to kind of roll,
Right.
but I think there's other players who need that perspective from the coach to kind of give it to them. Like, this is what you're doing. You're an unbelievable player, but to take the next step and to be a bigger part of this team, and depending on what their aspirations are later in the team or in the future, you gotta. This is the role you have to play, and these are some of the things you have to work on within the team dynamic. That is different than, I'm not worried about your physical and your technical ability, but I'm worried about how you fit inside the team.
Right. How about you, Randy? How do you deal with those elite athletes and working them into the team dynamic?
Well, it's a tough thing. I mean, it's a task that you have every single day at training. Because the truth of the matter is that every team has a depth chart. No team, unless you're the national team, right, has every single player listed is elite. And this word elite gets thrown around so much, but you have, a depth chart, and you have 3 tiers to your team, and you have your group of top players, and you have this middle core group of the pack that might be a little more average, and then maybe another handful of players underneath that's striving to raise their level to that other tier. So, as a coach, you want these tiers to look like this and not so much like this, right? But every coach has to deal with that on some level. So I think you just have to have that dialogue with your players, like you were saying, sitting down with them, having an open and running dialogue all the time with your top players, and you have to be checking in with them before training, after training, and during training all the time, constantly challenging them, keeping them focused, and demanding more from them than maybe the rest of the team or other players that just can't do it at that time. For example, like in a team dynamic, if you're running a training section or an exercise with your team, and you stop and you make a coaching point to the larger group, and then you kind of see something just for a specific player that might be the next level up, right, like one of your top players, then find a moment after that to go over and just have a one-on-one coaching point just with them, because maybe it applies to them but no one else on the team, because that's their level, right? So always be doing that, and that's the hardest part of being a coach, I think, is you feel like you have to have eyes in the back of your head sometimes, because every player needs something different and something special from you, because they're all coming from different places and different levels. So definitely just keep a special eye on those top players and constantly keeping them on their edge, because you don't the last thing you want is your top players playing down to the level of the rest of the team and the people around you. Like James said, you want everybody else playing up to their level. But I think the leadership thing that you guys were talking about, I think for me, those two things don't really relate. You want that. That's like the total package of a player, right? To have this elite soccer player, this elite athlete, and have them be a leader. Wow, that's the whole package, right? That's the GOAT. But those two things don't necessarily relate all the time. Just because someone's an elite athlete and your best player doesn't make them your leader. That's something that might start from within them, but you have to grow that and cultivate that too. So, everyone wants the GOAT. I don't think everyone has it, but just keep that special eye out at training for your top players.
Perfect. Actually, that kind of leads me to the next question, and you answered it a little bit already, Randy, so I'll come back to you. How do you make those elite players better? They might come in thinking they're the best on the team, and they maybe don't make much improvement, or we talked about the leadership style and improving maybe their mental game, but what are some different ways maybe out on the pitch that you need to still be aware of improving the already elite?
Well, I think it's not just on the pitch; it's off the pitch for sure. I'm a young coach. I'm very fortunate to have started my career at Chico State. Our athletic department, the core group of our coaches here, have been very successful and really cool that we all kind of share the same philosophies. So I think if you asked any of our head coaches or our staffs here at Chico State, they would all their answers would kind of lead back to the same thing, and that's relationships. I think the relationship you have as a coach with your players is your most powerful tool. Nothing can be more powerful than coming from a place of love and trust and respect and positivity. If your players know that your critiques and your heart and everything you're saying to them is coming from that place, then they become limitless, right? They have that confidence and they know that you have their back and you're supporting them and you want nothing but the best for them. So it always comes back to that for me, that relationship, and you have to be so intentional about how you kind of cultivate it and shape it and grow it, because you can't just take it for granted and think, well, I'm the coach and they're the player, so we're just going to have this bond and we're just going to have this mentorship.
Sure. That
doesn't happen. So don't let that happen by happenstance, if you will. Be very intentional about that, and if you can get your players to want to play for you and want to go out and die on the field for you, they're gonna go exponentially further than a player that is playing in spite of you. Sure. So it just always goes back to that relationship piece for me, and really using that as a tool to help us as coaches.
Right. How about you, James? How do you guys find yourself getting your elite players to improve and to take them even themselves to the next level?
I mean, I agree a lot with what Randy said in terms of relationships. Once you have that relationship with your player, then they trust you and they trust their teammates, and it can grow, and then they can start growing in themselves within the team. And I think some ways we try to do it is just challenging our players. Some players can accept different challenges than others, and putting challenges in front of them that maybe some players can't do, but challenge them in a way that these elite players are your top players, so maybe they are good technically and physically, but can you have some different tactical conversations with them that they need to work on? Or can you, everyone has different leadership styles. Some elite players are not going to say one word and just work really hard, and others are, not all elite players are leaders, which Randy had said earlier, which I agree with. But can you kind of hone some of their leadership skills throughout the way, and challenge them to be better teammates, to be keep working hard. Can you get better? You're good technically, but can you get even better here? You're good physically, can you get stronger here? And just trying to make them more well-rounded as a player, as a person. They're playing great on the field, but they're not doing great in the classroom. That is not acceptable either. So pushing them in that regard, to challenge them. You got to step up this stuff too. You can't just be great as a soccer player. You got to be great with your schoolwork, with your relationship on campus, and so that's one of the ways that our avenue of coaching is awesome, is that you can instill some of those values through through the game to kind of reach other parts of their lives too. So yeah, I would say just kind of challenging them in different ways to kind of push them to kind of grow better and grow in different ways on the field and off the field.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Um, all right, I'm going to come back to you, James, actually, with this question. So I think we've touched on it again a little bit, but do you see yourself having to approach activities different for elite athletes, or do you approach them the same way, but maybe tweaking it slightly? So obviously we can progress a lot faster because of the physical and technical skill, but do you have to completely separate activities or modify them, and in terms of the team scale? So when you're bringing an activity to the team, how are you modifying that for the elite athlete, or are you not modifying it at all?
I think within, like a team setting, like, a training session, you got to keep. I think you got to approach the activities the same way as a team, but have different expectations maybe within for your, with your elite athlete. Some touch restrictions, or, like Randy said, you pull them aside and all right, here's your, you need to work on your body shape a little bit this way, and stuff that they can handle and they can improve on. I don't think you want to like cater to just that one player. I don't think it helps the team dynamic. But in the team setting, just, I think as a coach, is being able to kind of modify the training session for that player in different ways without messing up the kind of the team dynamic. But at an individual level, whether in the weight room and, they can do stuff on their own, that's when you can kind of give them some stuff that's, that's different. Maybe they can, more weight or whatever it is. In the individual setting, you can give them those challenges that are different, but I think within a team setting, it's, keeping it the same within the team, but giving them different expectations and restrictions and helping and, and learning and other coaching advice that can help them get there without kind of changing the team dynamic.
Sure, not isolating them too much.
Correct.
How about you, Randy? How do you approach making those modifications for elite athletes?
I just think you have to demand what's appropriate to each of your players. So, James pretty much said it all. He touched on it really well. You put different restrictions on them on both sides of your team. If these guys need 3 touches in a drill and these couple can do it in 1, then make them do that. Don't be scared to kind of single out your top players at practice, because that's what's going to push them. And then, the rest of the team kind of sees, hey, these are the top players, like we need to keep up with them. So don't be scared to kind of to single them out and demand more of them, because they need it to stay sharp and to keep growing.
Yeah, great point. All right, Randy, coming back to you for this last question, and then we will take to our Twitter questions. How do you train the younger elite athlete? I think that this is probably the stage where, maybe those athletes start to pull away from the pack, if you will. And as we stated, if they're playing at the collegiate level, there's maybe at least a certain level that everybody is at, and then the elite kind of rises even from there. But when you are training those incredible 8-year-olds and they're dominating academy games, does that automatically make them elite? And how do you kind of keep them at that level?
Well, it's there's so many players out there that you hear about. This 8-year-old did this, and this 10-year-old is playing, with 15-year-olds, so they're going to be professional and this and that. Well, I just think you can't get caught up in the hype with those guys, and definitely don't get in their ear about how good they are and this and that. It's all situational, and it's all, comes down to what's appropriate for them. If it's an 8-year-old that's tearing it up.
Uh-oh. We lost Randy. All right. Well, that's okay. James, we'll have, when Randy jumps back on, we'll go back to her, but I'll let you kind of take over
Okay.
where she ended.
Where were we again?
Just with the younger
athlete. Yep.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, again, she was talking about situational. Every player is a little bit different, depending on, a lot of times those kids are physically just at a different place than some of the players they're playing against.
Sure.
So it's challenging them different ways, trying to, all right, maybe you're better than this kid, but can you do some of these technical abilities I ask you? Can you knock a ball 20 yards in the air at this level? Like, can you go through some of these things that are going to help you longer down the way? Like, you can dribble through 10 guys, but can you do this that are gonna, at some point, you're not gonna be able to dribble through 10 guys. So can you kind of improve on pushing them to improve in different ways? But I think is keeping them level-headed is a lot of, I think, main, teaching them some mental things. There's sometimes you get to this point and you get some hype, and there's a lot of pressure from parents and coaches and friends, and now with the internet, like, everything blows up. You're on YouTube and you have 1 million views in 2 hours. So
Right.
making sure that they keep level-headed and that they're still enjoying what they're doing. I think an enjoyment level has to be, I think of when I was growing up. I just love playing. There's no pressure. I just love playing and just got better. And, I had people around me that, challenged me to get better, but I was never, like, not wanting to play because there's so much pressure, and I feel like we got to avoid some of that burnout that sometimes can happen with some of these players.
Definitely.
But just, I think having the right coaches around them who can, who give them confidence, but also push them to get better. And, I think some of those external things, to keep, coaches and parents, and keep them level-headed. You're 8. You're not messy yet, so give it some time.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna then hit you with a Twitter question, James.
Okay.
Wait to see if hopefully Randy can get back on. But this question comes from Andrew Richardson, who is a 30 under 30 alum as well. What phases beyond on-field play of the team environment have you changed or improved for the group by having an elite player? So besides, like you mentioned, you want their play to hopefully match that elite one. What other ways do you think having elite athletes just improves that overall team environment?
I think a lot of them are motivated and have a lot of talent that can push themselves in different ways, and I think that can then help. Let's say they're really good in the weight room, they're physically really strong. Can they then push the rest of the team in the weight room to kind of get better and kind of push themselves? Or let's say it's the winter time. Here we're playing a lot of indoor. Can that player help the players get better around them? And I think it then can, with some better players, you can start showing some of the other players, like this is a level we can get to, and kind of, it can kind of change the team culture, and sometimes some of those players, if their attitude's wrong, it actually hurts the team culture. But can those players then bring a team culture that then, especially at a college level, you bring this elite athlete in who can make the players around them better and make the, the culture better within the program. You're going to start getting players that want to be within that culture. And I think from there it can kind of, you can build a program that is getting players who want to get better and who want to push themselves like some of those elite athletes that you brought in.
Right, and want to be a part of the program.
Correct.
Yeah. So Randy, sorry we lost you for a second there, but
yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right. Actually, this question, I think that is a Twitter question, kind of picks up from where you left off, and that is how so you mentioning, kind of keeping the hype down a little bit, and James ended up touching on this a bit when you jumped off the call. They're 8 years old, they're not messy yet, keeping them kind of grounded and realistic about everything. So how do you keep those maybe younger elite players or even the older ones motivated when they know they're elite already, if that makes sense?
Well, I didn't hear James's whole response, so hopefully I don't just repeat what he just said. But you just have to keep challenging them and keep letting them know and showing them that they still have things to work on. When people get complacent, complacency is kind of the killer to a lot of success. Just pushing them and pushing them and pushing them to the next thing. Once they've conquered something, give them a little pat on the back and let them know that they're improving and they're doing well and they're a good player. You want them to have that confidence, but don't sit around for the next week going, oh, well, you can do that now, so you're good. No, you have to come with the next challenge and the next thing, and that's just part of having the right training environment and not being nearsighted. You have to have your eye on the goal, down the road.
Perfect. Was there anything else, Randy, that you wanted to include when we were talking about the younger elite athletes? Just want to make sure you have the opportunity.
I think I covered it. I'm not sure where I got cut off, but
That's all right.
I'm sure I said enough.
Well, awesome. I think that's about all the time we have. Thank you to our viewers. Thank you for the Twitter questions. And I also want to give a big thank you to Samantha Snow, who's the head coach over at Georgia Southwest State, who was supposed to be the moderator, but because of some technical issues,
She
I
ditched
jumped
us.
on. She ditched us. But she actually developed all the questions and came up with this really great topic. And yeah, so I want to thank Sam again. She's a 30 under 30 alum, and we're very proud of her in the program. So I want to thank her for that. And on that note, I want to remind everyone that there's no better way to train your elite athletes than becoming an elite coach, and you can do that through our winter residential courses. Prices increased $200 on December 6th, so visit our master schedule to take a look and make sure you get registered before then. Randy and James, thank you guys again so much for joining.
Thank
And
you.
we'll see you guys next time on our next 30 Under 30 live chat. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so
Awesome.
much,
Thank
Laura.
you.